Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wine Foundry in Napa Valley, California. The Wine Foundry is a boutique family-owned winery specializing in the creation of custom wines for connoisseurs across the globe with grapes from the most sought-after vineyards across Napa and Sonoma. In addition to the Wine Foundry, we've got two brands. Anarchist Wine Co. focuses on exploring new techniques and varietal combinations. Our sibling brand, Foundry, is centered around specific grape varietals and or wines created from specific vineyards, time and place. This week, my colleague Patrick Sabo and I are excited to chat with Craig Holme of Radoux Cooperage. You know that oak barrels play a central role in winemaking. Those who've been to the winery know we constantly talk, debate, question the influence of oak all the time. Dialogue really never stops. If there's a takeaway, it's that there's really no definitive answers. And when it comes to winemaking, I suppose that there's multiple truths depending on a number of variables dictated by your wine style, the weather, logistics. The moral of the story is, I guess, winemaking is not a recipe. Once you've fallen into that, like the recipe trap, whether it's a particular yeast strain, cap management technique, or barrel, you have missed the boat. In addition tonight to seeing how barrels are made, we look forward to taking a deeper dive into the sensory characteristics of oak on aroma, flavor, and structure. Along the way, we'll learn where the oak is sourced, toasting levels, other coopering decisions. To start, I would like to raise a glass to everybody. And if you kind of do this collectively, I say to the storks who bring babies, and to the swallows who bring none, and I will swallow right now. Before jumping in with Craig, hey Patrick, I'm tasting, and you're tasting actually, Foundry's 2017 Pinot Blanc from Schrader Ranch up in Mendocino. Hey, with white wines in particular, you'll hear, oh, it's over-oaked, or I'm picking up whispers of lilac, or the last 5 minutes of the film Gallipoli. Let's take a deep dive into sensory characteristics later, but briefly, how do you pick out wood? Like, what's the goal for picking out wood?
For picking out choices of what barrels to use on which wine?
Well, or actually just more like when when somebody at home tonight is tasting a white wine, or Craig is actually tasting a rosé, so it might not have any wood on it. But like, just a brief thing, like, where is the wood on wine?
So, you can definitely, wood, depending on how the age of the wood you used and how long you kept the wine in that barrel, it can have little to huge impact on aromatically and on the palate as well, right? So the aromas of vanilla and chocolate or spice or tobacco and cedar or things like that are all, derived from the barrel. And so in the case of the Pinot Blanc, I wanted to have a little bit of the barrel, the feel of the barrel, but not so much the oak, the flavor and the aroma of the barrel. So I used mostly older barrels in this case for this wine, because I didn't want it for it to contribute a lot of that of butterscotch, vanilla, perceived kind of richer or sweeter type notes on the nose. I wanted you to feel it a little bit on the palate though, and so using an older barrel that's been used on previous wine, Chardonnay and other wines previously, what has been is it adds some of the weight of on the palate without necessarily as much of flavor and aroma. And so depending on style, as I wanted you to feel it more than I wanted you to taste it and smell it. And so meaning by just adding overall texture and weight to the wine. So I wanted you to feel like had been barrel aged, but I didn't want to put, as I said, newer oak on this, because I wanted to maintain the fruitiness and the flavors that the Pinot Blanc brought, but just add a touch more texture. And so that was the goal behind barrel aging that wine.
And if anybody's tasting at home, you might actually, depending on the way the winemaker and the style, you might actually pick up some of those notes on your aromatics, on your flavors. But on the wine that some people ordered for tonight and what we're drinking, Patrick really dialed it back and wanted to use barrels that have been used several times. Should we kind of jump in with Craig?
Yes, Craig, indeed. So, Craig and I have been working together for the last several years. You know, Radoux is a local cooperage here with an office in Santa Rosa, but you know, most of the wood, at least the French wood that we're buying from, is of course sourced from forests in France. They have a location over in France as well, where they can make barrels, as in addition to they can assemble the barrels here. And so we've been buying a combination of both barrels that have been made in the U.S. and barrels that were made in France. And so, but Craig, kind of, I know you've been in the wine business for a while. Is it, you know, what has brought, you know, what part of the oak business and about winemaking have been, you know, exciting to you to have the opportunity to work with those barrels? And
we cut out for a sec. What was the question? It cut out.
That's okay. I'm sorry about that. I was just saying, you know, we've been working together for the last several years, and I was just curious what aspect of barrels in general and of oak and influence in wine kind of brought you to this point to kind of want to be interested in it.
Yeah, I started. I came from winemaking, and I'd trained my wife's also a winemaker. We started to separate jobs, and I loved the oak part of it, and I loved always talking to coopers. So I went more to that side of it. And I love, can I get to see both sides of it now? I get to be an expert on the oak, plus I know wine. So I get to help winemakers out a lot more with how the flavors are going to work. I mean, they make the wine, I can taste their wine, and then I can help choose what barrel is going to work the best with what they want to accomplish with the wine.
I think that's a fun part of it to me. That's one of the best parts of kind of trying to figure out the secret, you know, formula, if you will, or and techniques that you might have you could do to use this particular forest or that forest. And you have that opportunity to go over to and see some of the, to France to see forests and sourcing the locations.
Yeah, we go every 2 years for the company, just have a big company gathering, and we visit the forest every time. And we see all the trees that are out there. It's amazing. There's like 200-year-old trees minimum. It's getting younger now because they're running out of trees, so they might harvest them earlier now. But it's incredible what they have over in France. I mean, we have the trees here in America as well, but it's not the same age trees and not as majestic as, say, this photo here. But yeah, it's incredible what they do there. And then Radoux's been making the barrels over there since mid-80s, but they've been a cooperage or working on oak since for 73 years now. They started off repairing barrels and building tanks, and then said, okay, we know how to repair barrels, we might as well make barrels. So that's when they started making barrels in the 80s, and then we started making barrels here in Santa Rosa in the 90s.
It's amazing to think of. Go ahead, Stu.
I was just going to ask, actually, I mean, if you could kind of walk us through how they make them. How do you guys actually kind of walk us through the construction process? So
I can start from how we get the trees. Anyway, the French government owns most of the forest. There's some privately owned as well, but the French government runs it all, and then they have silent auctions where you just have to choose your lots and you'll mark your tree. They have every year, each different cooperage has a different color or marking that they have to mark on the trees they want, so they don't know who's trying to buy what trees. So it's a huge thing, and they have to guess how much it should be worth. So that's why barrels are pretty expensive, because as trees are running out, yeah, you got the markings right there. So each different dot there or number or color is a different cooperage, and there's probably 80 to 100 coopers. So we're one of the top coopers and one of the most well known. So we usually get the trees we want. But so once you get your trees, we'll season the wood for 24 months. Like, we have our own stave mill, so they'll cut the trees down, age them, cut the wood up, age them in our own little yard for 24 months or to 36 months, depends on what we want, and depends what the winemakers want as well. Most people still use 24-month wood for French oak, but some use 36. It just costs a little bit more because you're storing it for an extra year. So we age the wood. You have to water the wood every day for the 2 years, 3 years. And then we have our own stave mill that will cut the staves up. And then once each different, Radoux we don't go by the forest, so we go by the stave tannin level and grain tightness. So some coopers will say they have Allier forest or Tronchet, Tronchet is the more prestigious one, tighter grain. Allier is a little bit less. And then there's other ones, you go to Limousin, which is wide grain, which is mainly used for cognac and other kind of spirits like that. But so the best wood is usually Allier. We take a huge center of France area and northern France. So because we developed this oak scan technique, we can scan every single piece of wood and work out its grain tightness and the tannin level. So we divide it out that way. So we're more consistent than just choosing this is a Tronçais forest or this is an Allier forest.
That's perfect. And so, sorry about that, Patrick. You were just going to ask. You were going to ask something.
No, I was just going to. I was just going to comment that it's amazing how variable it could be within one forest or within a tree even. And so I love the old school artisanry that comes with how they've been making barrels for years and centuries, and however the reality is when you're trying to make wine, particularly commercially, or you're trying to go for a somewhat a predictable result, the more variability makes it more difficult. And so I was at an oak tasting a couple of years back and there was another competitor does a kind of similar type of thing where they scan each board, a competitor of Radoux, that another Cooper, and they do a similar type thing where and so they're trying to know, and the goal is to try to minimize variability and to give you what you want. And so whereas I'm a traditionalist, I love the old school ways, I embrace using some technology as well to make a predictable result. People come to the winemaker, of course, to make a certain wine profile to hit that mark. And so the more variability, whether it's through grapes or through the Coopers or through the oak or whatever, through the process in general, it makes it more difficult to achieve that. And so I think it's an amazing part of technology is embracing some of the new stuff like oak scan in this case. So you don't have to guess how many, or use your eyes where it's subjective and see how tight those rings are, how tight the grain is. You can actually use a computer to scan it, and then allows you to make I think.
And we can customize your barrel. You could say you want an Allier style barrel, and we could choose those staves to be an Allier barrel, or we can choose those staves to be a Limousin barrel.
I'm going to pull up a video here of you guys basically kind of working on it. Here, let's get it started. And if you could just kind of walk us through maybe a couple of things that are happening here. So we obviously have the staves.
Yeah, so they're all barcoded. You see on the ends of them, they're all have barcodes on them. That's after they've been scanned. So that's a different categories of different tannin levels. So they're all been stacked. There's one person, I think a machine does it now, but they source them by hand or by machine, every different stave. So right now there's put into different categories of tannin level. Barrel's been assembled after being heated. So they're not toasted yet. They've been heated. They have to be heated to be bent. Otherwise they'll snap. So you got to heat the wood up. They're making heads right now. So that's the barrel head getting made. And we convection toast the head, not in fire, because it goes through a machine instead, but that's fire toasting. That's the barrel getting tightened up and formed into a barrel shape. And these guys are pretty fit. They do a lot of workout throughout the day.
And what station do they have you on when you're over there? What station are you working? Are you on the?
I do the observing. I've done a little bit of work there. I've worked for a couple of days, but yeah, it's a lot of work. And your arm gets tired. And they actually put those hoops on. They were temporary hoops you just saw then, and then they take them off again and put the real hoops on later on when they do the toasting phase.
It's amazing how many times those hoops come on and off the barrel in the process. And,
yeah, no, it's crazy. Like the fake hoop, as in those rough looking hoops, and then they put on the real shiny stainless steel ones, right? Oh, not stainless, what's it called? The other hoops at the end, the finished hoops.
Yeah.
Here, I'll pull up
kind of a
little bit further. Yeah. A little bit further. So you can, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but are they basically they're trying to kind of create the warmth and steam over here so that you can bend those staves? Yeah,
so the ones on the left are the ones that are just getting heated up so that they can bend the hoops, and they'll do that tighten. You would have seen a cable earlier that was tightening.
Yep.
That'll pull in at the bottom later on, and that's when they'll form the shape of the barrel and put on the temporary hoops. The guys over on that are right at the front of the screen are actually toasting the barrels to the toast level that we're making to sell the barrels, or to what the winemaker wanted. So it's a two-step process.
I mean, it's fascinating. If there's if you're going to go on a field trip to wine country, I mean, tasting rooms are great, visiting wineries great, but actually getting a chance to go inside a cooperage, it's loud, but it is fascinating, and just to see them put that stuff together, all by really by hand, fascinating.
Oh yeah, it's all still old school. We have machines that help us out, but it's still a man doing it or a female doing it most of the time.
And Patrick, when we first started, Craig kind of like talked about the forests, right? Barrels are an agricultural product. Barrels come from trees which are farmed. It's kind of hard to make that connection when they're sitting in the room. We often talk about winemaking history and the history of winemaking. We have a perfect example in the barrel. Forget about like the change from amphora to barrel, but can you just talk about the tree to barrel, Patrick, a little bit? You've kind of always raised this up.
That's one of my favorite parts, to think about, whereas it does take a long time, unfortunately, to get the trees to be ready to go. Typically 200 years-ish, sometimes maybe at the low side, 150 to 250 years. Depends on where it's growing and who's picking the tree. But to me, that's one of the amazing products to think of. That this tree was planted, that we're buying this year, were planted in early 1800s intentionally to be used as a barrel. And so you wait 200 years, you go through several lifetimes of people, maybe the great grandson or the great great granddaughter of the planter or is harvested, deciding when to harvest that tree. And it's just the whole scale of the timing is amazing to me. And so, to cut it down and then to wait 2 or 3 years just as a board, just sitting outside being, and of course they will, as Craig mentioned, they will use water, they use sprinklers to help to kind of the process, because you're trying to season it out. You're trying to leach out a lot of the greener material. If you use the younger unseasoned wood, the wine would be harsher, the wood would be harsher, and the qualities that you would get would not be the smoothness that we've come to assume and expect and want in the wine. But just the scale is, to me, one of the best parts of it. Again, wait 200 years, then wait another 3 years. What's another 3 years if you've already waited 200 years? Wait another 3 years, and then finally start to work on that barrel. And then you see all the people. There's probably 20 or 30 people that touch that barrel in the process, in the forming of it. And of course, then that barrel will last for a number of years, and we'll use different wines will come in and out of it. To me, it's just the kind of where it fits into and in the scale and thinking about this as indeed agriculture. A barrel is grown, and just like wine, people talk about growing wine, you're growing barrels too. And to me, that's a real fun part of it. I think that's amazing.
Well, how Craig talked about how, the French government kind of farms the forests. So to have that foresight 200 years ago to set this course in motion, where you're going to be harvesting this product in 200 years, it's great. I mean, 200 years ago, Beethoven hadn't even written the Ninth Symphony. Craig, you're from Australia. Welcome to New Holland, right? I think it wasn't even until 1864 where they said, we're going to name New Holland, Australia. And it's this scope of time when the barrels that you're going to be bringing us today is from wood from a long ago. But it's not like cutting down old growth forest. This has been farmed.
Yeah, and it's all about the time. You need it to take a long time. We could grow trees faster, but then you wouldn't have the same quality of wood, or the grain would be a lot wider, and the wine wouldn't develop as well. So it's all about, it has to take a long time. We can't cut them down too early.
We've got a question from the audience. And Patrick, so it comes from Jim Rose, and he's like, hey, so what's the oldest barrel you've had? So implied in there is like, okay, so could you kind of walk us through new, once used, twice used, to kind of say why maybe an old barrel would be a problematic thing, or so just kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, so there's two main types of barrels, shapes of barrels that we use. Burgundy barrels, which are slightly shorter and fatter, about roughly 228 liters, and and Bordeaux barrels, which are slightly taller and thinner, and those are generally about 225. And there's different thicknesses of staves, and there's other differences, but essentially the barrels, other than the thickness and the grain selection between a Burgundy barrel and a Bordeaux barrel. So in Burgundy, we're not over here, we don't have to tie things back to France and tradition, but in general, winemaking is tied back to French tradition. So generally in Burgundy, they would bottle wine after 1 year in barrel, and in Bordeaux, 2 years in barrel, roughly. And so typically when you're talking about a Burgundy barrel, and the vintage each year would be a new year. So if it's a 1-year-old barrel, it would be a once used barrel. Or in the case of a Bordeaux wine, a 2-year-old wine would be considered a once used barrel, because that's typically the barrel aging regime. So for 2019, a 2017 vintage barrel would have been for a Bordeaux would have been a once used, and for a Burgundy would have been a twice used, because we would have used it on 2 vintages, the 17 and the 18 vintage. So in that case, so, and depending on really the goal of what the wine is. So for Sauvignon Blanc or Viognier or some Chardonnays or maybe even Pinot Blanc, we might have a 5 to 12-year-old barrel that's in there. Typically, we rotate them out after neutral is about 4 or 5 years basically of use is roughly neutral. And so anything post that would, again, you're going to get the effect of the barrel, but not the oakiness and flavors and aromas that you would get normally out of a younger barrel. So question is, what do you want on your wine? In the case of the Pinot Blanc, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't want much of that quote unquote oakiness. I just wanted to soften and rounder. I wanted to wait. I wanted to feel the barrel. I didn't want to smell or taste it. So in the case of, in our cellar right now, the oldest barrel we probably have is probably about 10 years old. And so, and very few, most of them are, and for whites and for reds, I generally rotate them after about 5 years. And so, or 6 years, we will sell them to somebody else for planters or for, maybe for whiskey or something, or for beer.
Yeah, 8 years is usually an average.
Craig, can you say that one more time?
Well, yeah, 8 years is usually kind of an average of most wineries of circulating barrels out of the winery. And then, because I mean, the older they get, you might start getting old wood flavors as well. So you can't keep them too long, or unless you keep them full all the time, you don't really get that problem. But most wineries can't keep their barrel full the whole time.
Yeah, that's a good point, Craig. So the to Jim's question, I think, is how long can you use it? If you kept it full the whole time and the wine was fresh and was not on its way to higher levels of vinegar in the wine, then really that barrel can last indefinitely. It's kind of like a vine can last indefinitely until it gets sick. And so the vine, in the barrel's case, the higher levels of bacteria in the wine, the vinegar producing bacteria will make the wine, especially when it's empty, it'll go to vinegar very quickly. So you don't want to have a barrel that's been sitting around. As a matter of fact, we have to store the empty barrels with sulfur gas to keep the barrel fresh. So we use sulfur gas in the barrel when it's empty to maintain so that it won't go to vinegar, and it'll be fresh the next time when you want to use it.
Hey, we've got a question for Craig here via text. You can also chime in on the Q&A. You don't have to send it via my telephone, but thank you for doing so. This comes from Seamus. Hey, so Craig, somebody's asking about the different, what's the purpose of different toast levels? So this person's been to the winery, they've seen medium, medium plus, heavy toast. What is the purpose of toast levels? Can you kind of talk us about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it brings out different flavors and different profiles. Like you go higher up with toast levels, like a medium plus or a heavy toast, you'll start getting more toast flavors and more like coffee kind of aromas coming out of the wine or putting into the wine. If you go on the lighter side, you'll get more oakiness and more tannin levels. The tannin changes with the heat as well. So it all depends on the wine. Like a Chardonnay in Napa Valley can easily handle a medium plus toast, but somewhere else they might go for a medium toast if they're trying to maybe go over to Sonoma. It just changes and depends on your wine and depends what you're going for. Like the Cabernets again in Napa can handle heavier toast usually. People have changed a lot with what they use these days. We're turning it back a lot. So we're doing a lot more, the barrel that grew in the forest that we saw at the start, that's a new style of barrel that actually the Wine Foundry uses these days, which is a medium long style toast. So it's more subtle, it's more smooth, it'll show more fruit, it's more elegant, and it brings the wine out more rather than adding more barrel to the wine. So we do both ways. Radoux's known for big, powerful barrels, but we also have a new line because in the early 2000s, everyone wanted a lot more toast, a lot of oak. but now it's more gone down the other way. We still want to sell barrels, so we had to bring out a new kind, which is this more subtle, elegant style of barrel. So toast level all depends on what you want in your wine or what you want your wine to do. So you can go higher, depends on where your wine's from, where your fruit's from, and what you're going for.
And then can you talk about the tannin? So, I mean, it's something that a lot of people, they usually talk about oak in terms of how the wine smells, how the wine tastes. Oh, butterscotch. Here's some campfire notes. You mentioned tannins. Can you talk about that a little bit more? And Patrick, if you want to jump in after Craig, it'd be great.
So back to the toast that I was talking about before. So with doing a longer, slower toast, you'll actually soften the tannins more in the wood. And we actually select woods that have, with our oak scanning, we choose lower tannin wood. So say for mountain fruit, there's usually a lot more tannic wine. So you'll choose stays from us that are lower tannin levels. You don't want to add more tannin to the wine. And by toasting more, you can soften out tannins. A lighter toast might leave more tannins coming out of the oak. So you might want to go for a heavier toast, but also it's to do with the timing. So a lower temperature toast will soften out tannins more.
Perfect. Patrick?
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, as Craig mentioned, that especially for what I think that we try to do for the most part here, Radoux is in the past, and maybe not for the future, but in the past, I would agree is generally wasn't known as a delicate one. It was a little bit more impacting, but I asked Craig to, if we could kind of, figure out what the right barrels were to, that I think some of that's appropriate and some of the clients do care for that. But most people, I think, have dialed it back a little bit and are looking for more of and because we get plenty of, most of the fruit that we get being in Napa and in Sonoma has I'd say a medium to high levels of tannin, of fruit tannin. We don't need necessarily to overwhelm it with oak tannin on top of that as well. So as Craig mentioned, I like to get the barrels that are a bit more elegant in regards. And so you still want to feel them without being overwhelmed. So we get, medium to medium-ish tannin barrels. And I think that complements medium to high level tannin fruit. And so the combination of those two things can allow the fruit to maintain what it has, but to support with the barrels. And so French have the term of the élevage, kind of thinking of that lifting the wine, the barrel. I want to really lift it, not to sit on top of it. And so I think that I appreciate, whereas I did like the impact of what I in my head think of the form, the older Radoux style as being a bit weightier.
A little more muscle.
Yeah, that is attractive. I think there are some elements of that I do find, but I find to be a bit more. It shows even higher layers of subtlety and technique, in my opinion. So I personally value that style even higher because I think that it shows your craft without being clumsy. And so I applaud that addition to their portfolio.
Well, hey, Craig, what makes what is Radoux? So kind of like how do you kind of separate yourself from other coopers? Is there a house style quality? What makes Radoux?
I mean, definitely a house style. And then, like I said, one of our main thing was, I mean, there's one other one doing it now, but our whole thing was not using the forest and doing our scanning process for consistency and choosing and a lot more choices. People can choose, basically customize their barrel if they really want to, and if they know enough about it, they can choose every stave kind of thing. So, and we do have our house style toast. We still sell, most of our barrels are still the heavier style, which is because of what we're known for, and they work really well in Bordeaux, in Napa, places like that. But then there was a change in what everyone wanted, so that's why we brought in this new toast of the medium long. But we are still known for a big fruity style barrel and a big powerful barrel if that's what you want. So, yeah. Perfect.
Hey, Patrick, why don't we shift to the crucible? We're going to unleash the Kraken with the crucible. Anybody at home, if we're moving from white to red, and hey, Patrick, if you could, first of all, I think I zipped up to the winery, popped the head off of a barrel. Sorry for breaking the head when I did that. It was not my fault. It was not a Radoux. It was not a Radoux. I would not want to. So let's check out the crucible, and then how do you? So we talked about kind of like oak in white wine.
Yeah.
oak and reds, and then show us the barrel.
Yeah, so the definitely wanted more oak profile on the wine, of course, with almost any red. Certainly, in this case, Crucible, mostly a Merlot. So it's a big wine though, and so it's
not a wallflower. Definitely not a wallflower.
It's not a wallflower. No, it's a big hefty wine for sure, and you do aromatically and on the palate sense quite a bit more oak to the wine, and in a favorable way. It's big. Yeah. So this wine is, early on particularly. I just opened this up, half hour ago. This will be better, in 12 hours or something like that, because it's just it's a 2014 wine. It's not, and this is not a soft, delicate Merlot. This is a big bruising uppercut to the jaw there.
Got some muscles on it.
Yeah, and this wine actually, this was some of the Radoux that goes in this barrel actually, and this wine was of a bit weightier barrels as well. So I did get some back. This is from 2014 wine, that is, and so at that time I was getting the Radoux that were a bit more of the house style and that fit more towards the weight, and I think you can feel it and smell it on the wine too. There's definitely get chocolate and the coffee aromas, some of the toast as well, and there's definitely it smells intense, and the palate of course matches it as well with the tannins from the fruit from Broken Rock. This is Broken Rock, which is on the east side of Napa, and this is in the Vaca range here. It's on the way up to Stagecoach Vineyard, and about 400 feet elevation, 500 feet elevation. So it's kind of the tweener between the valley floor and the hillside. We call it the benchland. And so, I get much more barrel aromas, particularly on the palate on this wine than we did on the Pinot Blanc. And that was intentional, of course. And
can you show us the barrel? And then Craig,
sure.
When Patrick's talking about barrel, what characteristics, because people often say, I'm smelling blueberries, I'm smelling boysenberries. What are we looking for oak on red wine, while Patrick kind of shows us the barrel and then kind of takes a little dive inside? And he's going to go inside that and seal himself in there. Patrick, if you can, or Craig, walk us through red. What characteristics do we smell and taste?
So with barrels, most of the fruit you get, like the blueberries and that's more from the wine. That's why our toasting tries to emphasize that. So like with a lighter style toast, that will bring out more red fruits and that kind of thing. If you do the more heavier style toast, you're going to bring in more of the coffee kind of flavors and the more caramel and vanilla. And so it all depends on what you're going for and what you're looking for. That's why we use a lot more. Red wine can handle a lot more oak than white wine. That's why you got to be careful with putting too much oak on a Pinot Blanc, because a Chardonnay can handle it more. Pinot Blanc can't handle as much, and so you don't want to add too much. So it just all depends on the more heavier style toast you do, the more darker like coffee grounds you'll get, or more caramel you'll get. And if you go lighter style, you'll get a little bit more vanilla, that kind of thing.
And then Patrick, like when we were talking before, when you were talking about Jim's question, you don't always want to use a new barrel.
Definitely not. So it depends on the wine. And it depends on the preferences. It's so hard to stereotype what, if we're talking about my personal preference or yours.
Depends on the consumer.
Or the consumer.
Yeah, the consumer.
Yeah. And so there's so many subjective questions. How much oak do you want, and what style wine do you want? For whites and for Pinots, typically we go with less newer oak, that is, and less oak overall impact. But that's general. That's not every single one. Some Chardonnays are very oaky. Some Pinot Noirs are very oaky. It just depends on what you're looking for. And so it's hard to say there's one right answer for everyone. For me, in general, I go with less new oak on lighter wines. And so generally, it just depends. But again, if indoor, for the people that want more fruit and less of the oakiness, then I'm going to go with the older barrels. You might still have I'll go in barrel, but with a 2-year-old barrel, a 4-year-old barrel, as opposed to a brand new barrel. With cab, you want a good bit of oak, if not 100% new oak, maybe 50 to 100%. So it just depends. And so maybe sometimes we rotate it through different barrels. So you might put, one Radoux and one of this other barrel and one of this other barrel, and then we blend those together to get this end result. It's very, it's customized, just like the wine. The barrels would be custom made. The wine is custom made and custom decided on where we're going to go with. And so it's a question that the client gets to make decision on, and I just help them reach that decision. And so
we got a question here from a local, from Patty from St. Helena here, who is asking kind of like, what are some misunderstandings around oak? What are either Craig or Patrick? Patrick, since you're going there, and then you want to pass it off to Craig?
I think that people don't realize the range of things that oak is responsible for in the wine, you know. And so from the aromas and flavors to the structure of the wine. And so I don't know that people realize when they're talking about when someone says this has tobacco or spice or, you know, baking spices or butterscotch, whatever, but there all compounds. When you char and you burn a tree and you over a fire over a period of time, you bring out these compounds that morph the things that are in the tree and the compounds. So they could be anywhere from the vanilla category to this other thing. And so you're going to get these different flavors and aromas, and people think that I actually added all these different components, strawberry or cedar or whatever it is to it. And so it's just the same reason why cedar smells like cedar. Oak can smell like cedar. Burnt oak can smell like cedar also, or tobacco or mocha. And I think it's a matter of not understanding what's barrel derived and what's fruit derived as far as the overall wine. And what about you, Craig? What are your thoughts? What do you think people, what do you get? Do you get asked a certain question all the time, or what are the common misconceptions about barrels?
Well, no, I mainly talk to winemakers, so most of them know, but I mean, people think that it's just an old-fashioned thing, that we're still using them because that's what it's always been done, but it's a huge part of making wine. It's like, why would you just put it in a tank instead? Because we have stainless steel tanks these days, but it's like, it needs the certain size that they worked out was perfect size for aging wine, because it lets a wine breathe the right amount, and then it adds the right amount of flavoring, or it emphasizes the wine more. So we try to, with barrels, we don't really want to add too much to the wine. We're just trying to help the wine grow to what it's supposed to be in the final product. So it's a necessity. Like, people think, because you have all these cheaper wines that are made in stainless steel, you can't just replace them with that. It needs to be, you still need oak barrels. So, and it isn't just for looks, it is for a real purpose.
It is definitely not for looks.
No, you don't get the same result by using oak chips and a tank than you do by putting the wine in a barrel. Not even close, in my opinion. Not even close. Mm-hmm. But it'd be a lot cheaper to do it that way.
And they last a lot longer.
It does, but go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we have this book group that meets once a month around wine books. And something that came up was, we were kind of talking about innovation. And, and people, wine culture itself tends to be a little bit conservative, kind of hearkening to a golden era, which may or may never have existed. And some people fail to remember that oak was an innovation at one point, right? So, and I'm sure there was a reaction against that now, this newfangled thing of aging the wine in oak. And so I just always think in terms of misunderstanding, it's just like, Radoux is always changing and learning. You talked about how you're kind of assessing these, your toasting techniques and stuff like this, and modifying the style. Patrick is kind of always reading the style of the client. And oak itself at one point was an innovation. And as wine culture, the past is not always better. Thank Trino for saying hello to us there in the in the wine. I'm going to pull up a poll question, and you guys, and we have another question, but I'm going to pull up a little poll here for everybody. All right, so small amounts of wine evaporate from oak barrels during aging. What is a possible result of barrels not being topped on a regular basis? Powdery mildew can develop on the wine's surface. B, it lowers the pH acidity level in wine. C, the wine can tire prematurely due to oxidation. Or if you're not topping up your barrels, an over-extraction of seed and stem tannins can be extracted into the wine. So while we have that, we also have another question's popped up on the Q&A. And so Gray in Virginia Beach asks, this is a nice question for Craig. I'm sure he's very excited to answer this one. How much do barrels go for these days? Because they're so cheap.
About $1,000 for a French oak barrel and $500 for an American oak barrel.
So there's 300 bottles in a barrel. So if you could just kind of do that math right there, you're already looking at over $3 a bottle just to go into a new oak barrel. Why the price discrepancy between American, French, or let's talk about Central European oaks or something like that?
Well, because with American oak, they're not as old, the trees aren't. There's a lot of the trees out there. There's different regulations, plus shipping. We're not shipping it from France. So if there's $100 of one barrel is basically shipping it from France because you're shipping this large barrel over in a container. And then, I mean, there is also the quality. It's a different beast. American oak's good for certain things, but French oak's better for other wines, more higher quality wines, more premium in a way. American oak does a great job, but it's just a different story.
Well, it's a different species, right? So what are some characteristics if I think is like, when I'm smelling a wine, we know for certain telltale signs. We're like, oh, there's probably some American oak on this. What would you guys typically see if a consumer's smelling a wine and somebody's checking out a wine? Where would you say I'm smelling American oak here?
You get more for American oaks, more vanillins, more caramel. It's the main thing. And you don't really want it. There'll be some kind of deal characteristics which you want to try to avoid. But it's more of the sweetness. American oak is a lot sweeter than French oak.
Patrick, anything else?
Yeah, coconut. Yeah, it's coconut. Actually, white pepper sometimes too, or dill. But definitely. So the analogy I use for American oak versus sweet, and several of you on the call probably know that already. But and of course, I'm from the South, and everyone down south, if you were drinking tea or sweet tea, you would not be using equal or fake artificial sugar. The flavoring on American oak sometimes, especially when it's not the best of it, is a little bit artificial to me, whereas the French oak is much more like the higher quality vanilla as opposed to the imitation vanilla, and so it's not quite as simple as just as that. Definitely, and there are some American barrels that can make can be a great contribution
Spice?
to the.
Yeah.
It all depends on the wine again. If it's like a Zinfandel, it's fantastic with most American oaks. But some other wines won't like. A lot of white wines will not be very happy with American oak.
And that's actually what some of our clients talk about. Like, they get fixated on a Cooper. I hear this all the time. Like, I want this Cooper. I want Radoux. I want insert cooperage here. And it's kind of like, well, we can get certain components from here, just like you can get certain components from American oak. For American oak, for me, if anybody remembers Hawaiian Tropic, like the coconut oil. And here I am, like the pinkest guy on the planet. I used to lay out on the beach in the mid 80s and basically set myself ablaze by putting this oil on myself. But it can be really a very, very effective spice, and it's used by notable producers, right? In this country, in Spain and across the globe, and in Australia as well, right? With some Shiraz.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, let's why don't you? Well, you were about to jump in and say something, and I interrupted as usual. Nope. That's fantastic. Well, I'll tell you what. So here, I'm going to let you know the poll results here. So small amounts of wine evaporate from oak barrels. 8% said it was powdery mildew that can form on the wine's surface. 8% says it lowers the pH level in wine. 85% says it causes the wine to prematurely oxidize, and 0% said over-extraction of seed and stem tannins. Patrick, what is powdery mildew?
Powdery mildew is actually not found in wine, but it is found on grapes for sure, and other crops that can grow. There is there is something that can develop on the surface of a wine if it is, however, it's not called powdery mildew. It's called surface yeast, and so it is in the fungal family as mildew is, but it is a yeast in this case, and that's harmless actually. But that's one of the that is actually a good reason to keep the barrel topped as well.
Keep it up.
Although there is there's no, as far as I know, no sensorial impact of the surface yeast that might form on top of a wine, but it is not a case of powdery mildew, and is also not the case that it would lower the pH or acidity in the wine. Although it would technically, if you left it long enough and you had a bunch of vinegar now, that would actually lower the pH and increase the acidity in this case, but the right answer is to try to prevent and minimize oxidation and any other microbial growth, quite frankly, whether it's a surface yeast or anything else. So if you're trying to keep the barrel, anything that's growing that you don't want to grow in the wine, it's going to be aerobic. And so the more headspace you have, the more pleasant it is for those microbes to do their business in. So ideally, you want the wine to be fresh and vibrant and not overly, at least in a negative way, microbial. So you want to keep the wine and the barrel as topped as full as possible. So every month we pull them down and we top the barrels up. And so that's one of the most important things that we do post fermentation and kind of babysitting the wine.
So if for those, a lot of people don't realize this who are not in the winemaking world, you have to make extra wine specifically because you're going to be losing wine to evaporate. You're going to be losing wine to evaporation. Hey, we've got some questions from the audience. So Phil Gurin coming in from Los Angeles, the city of angels. For Craig, how long can you age a wine in barrel how long can you age a wine in a new barrel before the barrel itself loses any helpful properties? Mm-hmm. So leaching characteristics of oak characteristics into wine.
Well, a lot of it comes out within the first 6 months to a year, but then the next year, on the second year, it's still going to have a lot of oak. So if you took it out, it would still get a fair bit of oak flavor. On the third year, you're getting way down. I mean, it's basically neutral after 3 years. I think Patrick could agree to that time frame.
Yeah, 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, basically, it really depends on how much the wine is absorbed in it. The temperature. Mm-hmm. There's a few factors to that. That you have to count on. The temperature of storage also impacts it. So the colder it is, the slower it goes, or the warmer it is, the faster it goes. So if you had a warmer cellar and you didn't keep it cold, then it would actually extract faster. And so, so just a matter of, so it's hard to answer that question, Mr. Gurin, with a stereotypical answer, because it depends. It really does depend. The wine will get oakier, and whether or not that's quote unquote beneficial, that's subjective. So if you didn't want more oakiness, then keeping it in a newer barrel longer is not necessarily benefiting you personally. But if you're asking somebody else that wants as much as possible, then it only benefits that person to keep it in there longer, usually. And so it's hard to say it's not one right answer. And so you can't say 22 months is the only time you can do for a cab or for a Syrah or whatever. It depends. And so that's a political answer, I know, but it just depends on you can't stereotype to say X amount of time, perfect, 22 months. I don't even have to taste it. It's just bottle it as it, It just depends. If you wanted it that oaky, then more time in a newer barrel benefits your preference.
And we've got a Bordeaux lover here, Jay Johnson, chiming in from the East Lansing, Michigan, the Michigan State Spartans. After a barrel's been used once or twice, does the previous wine have any influence on the current wine? Fellas?
Depends how you treat the barrel and clean it. Because, I mean, with a white wine, not as much. With a red wine, yes. I mean, you're not going to put a white wine into a red barrel afterwards, but vice versa, you can. A lot of people use the Chardonnay barrel for 1 year, and then someone else will use it the next year for something else. So it all depends. So white wine won't affect the red wine as much, but the red wine is soaked into the wood 5 millimeters around about. So that wine's always going to be there. So there's different chemicals you can use, or depends how you treat it with hot water and steam. You can get rid of most of the flavors, but there's always going to be something there.
We're pretty uptight about our cleaning our barrels. Patrick, you just kind of want to give because we can run into microbial issues. So can you just let Jay know how we treat our barrels?
Yeah, so in general, there's a few things so we can do as Craig mentioned, you can kind of go in one direction, but you can't necessarily go backwards sometimes. So for example, if I want to keep these barrels for Pinot Noir and for the future, and I don't want to put a cab or a Syrah into it per se, or something heavier, then I'm going to kind of segregate these barrels. So we buy certain barrels sometimes for, whereas, whether it's going from like a heavier red, like say it's a Zin or a cab, I don't think you can taste the previous cab into the next Zin, if you will, or vice versa. I don't think you really pick up the previous wine. But as to Craig's point, we have a barrel cleaner and uses high pressure water, and we ozone it, and then we might even steam it, so which pulls out, extracts out the first couple of millimeters of the barrel, so we do have a way of kind of in between uses, we prep them again and keep them all fresh and vibrant so that it is more ready to go, and you don't have to worry about the past and whether it had. But of course, as Craig mentioned, you can make a white barrel into a red. You can make a red barrel always into a red. So
we can make a white. We could make a nice rosé out of that Chardonnay by putting it into a formerly red barrel. We've got a few more questions here. Chiming in from the mighty metropolis of Tiburon, California. So we mentioned Central European oaks. What is like Hungarian or Slovenian oak versus French oak or American oak? Is it the same species? Does it have the same characteristics? Was it hidden? What's up with that?
Same species, it grows differently because it's different climate and soil, but it's the same variety as in France. So some people would say there's some coopers that are just sourced from Hungary, and they're like, well, it's European oak. It's all European oak. It's the same thing, but trees do grow better in France, and they do grow. I mean, Hungarian oak is great for certain wines as well, and it's cheaper because of what it is. But it's also you get more spices from Hungarian oak, more aggressive spices compared to the French oak. And then even with it, like I said, within France, you go more north in France, it's cooler. The trees grow slower, so that's why there's different forests within France. But there will be a lot of arguments about that within coopers, but that's mainly because certain coopers are only able to get wood from certain areas. So it all depends on where you can get source your wood from. But there's a big difference between Hungarian and French oak. And
look, there's a lot of misunderstandings around there because it might have been behind the Iron Curtain for X number of years, and so we've only the wall only came down in 1988, which by some people's it was like that was 30 years ago, but other people in terms of winemaking, it's like geologic time, right? So these are very slow moving things. Hey, we got a question in from Monty in San Francisco for the Pinot Blanc that we're tasting. Patrick said he wanted body or mouth feel sensation from the barrel other than flavor. So what are you talking about, Patrick, with that? Like, is there an astringency from barrel tannin, or I'm going to kind of chime in here, or is it the evaporation, exposure to oxidation? Why use a neutral barrel? What benefits are you going to get?
I'd say both of those things. I'd say probably the oxygen impact or interface is probably the more important for that older barrel than the small amounts of residual barrel tannin still in there. The oxygen is a big and the portion of, and also stirring of the leaves, the batonnage. In the barrels, we stirred the barrels to disperse the leaves more. So it's the leaves dispersion and the oxygen interface that it has through the barrel that I think probably provided the most amount of what I was referring to earlier as far as the weight goes indoor. So the wine went through partial ML. It didn't go through full malolactic. However, I did do barrel aging in neutral barrels for 6-8 months, and so it did pick up some of that. And stirring the barrels, it definitely gives it more texture than what we had. So if we had a tank fermented version of this wine that went into Anarchist and went into some other wines we did, and is lighter and fresher, and so didn't have quite the texture and weight that the barrel aged version did. And so for the Foundry wines, you know, I wanted to be, you know, anarchist wines in general, especially on the whites and rosés are very light. And I wanted this to be a touch more. I didn't want it to feel like Chardonnay because we already have Chardonnay, but I wanted it to feel weight-wise to be kind of comparable to somewhere in the medium weight. And so the barrel aging allowed us to do that. But like I said, it was much more, to me, it was more of an oxygen thing, and lees, and the vessel makes it easy to stir up the lees. So the combination of logistics of the barrel and the oxygen, I think, is probably the biggest portion of that.
So somebody just corrected me for fake news, actually. So the wall came down
89.
in 89.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I was missed it by that much. The late 80s were kind of a blur. And then, hey, Clint kind of comes in. He goes, what about kind of a marriage of mixing American and French, kind of a hybrid barrel? Has anybody done it, or toss in some Central European oaks in there? Has anybody mixed staves yet? Or is this where Clint is going to make his fortune?
No, we do that already. You can get a barrel with American oak. The most common one is the cast part of it being, like the barrel part of it being, like not the head. The heads are French, and then the main frame of the barrel would be American. But we also do it where every other stave is French and American, French, American. But it's not as common. We can also do the Hungarian with American or French. So we do whatever people want, really. But the most common is not to mix it. But otherwise, if it is mixed, it'd be American oak barrel with French oak heads. And that's because of the toasting of heads mainly, because you don't have to. You always toast the head of an American oak barrel. You don't need to toast the head of a French oak barrel.
So Craig, hey, can you just answer that? Or why would you toast American heads of American barrels? Is toasting American heads? Why would you toast the heads of American barrels?
Because American oak's more like it's more harsh kind of wood, so you get the toasting softens it out, and it will get rid of anything that's bad about the oak basically. French is softer already, and a little bit and it's actually good to have untoasted heads on a French oak sometimes, because it can help with reducing like greenness if it was a green candle. Yeah, so but American oak, you need it. It's just it needs to be toasted. But some people don't toast it, but it's very rare. It's more safer to tone down the barrel by toasting it.
I don't love to generalize, but I will nonetheless. So French oak is, and French oak, if you have to generalize, I mean, quality wise, French oak's the best, and so you pay the most and you get the most, in my opinion. Hungarian oak or Eastern European oak doesn't have to be just from Hungary; it could be from Russia or from Hungary or from wherever. I think gives you, roughly 2/3 of the quality, that you would get from a French oak barrel. Mm-hmm. So you pay about 2/3 of the price too. And so American oak, in my opinion, generally, you get about half the quality that you would get in a French barrel. So American barrel, I'm prejudiced for sure. The American barrel, I mean, we're making premium wines. If I was trying to make less expensive wines, I would definitely need to use less expensive oak options, because it's a significant price difference, as Craig just mentioned. It's a lot. Twice is 100% more is a lot more, and so, however, in my opinion, that the same Zinfandel, you can get a really good product in an American barrel. You can get even better products in a French barrel. And so, but you have to pay a lot more for it. And so the question is it worth it to you? To me, it is worth it. And so I don't buy American barrels, not because that they're not a nice option. We have better options, and I'm looking for the best options. And so that's my personal judgment. Not every winemaker agrees with that assessment. And so it really depends on where you fit in the spectrum of preferences and things. I think French oak, you can get all the spices and things that you need from different coopers, different forests, different regiments of the barrel, without having to resort to. That doesn't mean those other things aren't good options, but we're trying to I'm trying to make the best that I can make, but it does come at a cost. And so that's the challenge. And so whether or not each person gets to make their own decision, whether it's worth it or not to you or to her. And so that's something that you just have to taste and decide what's the right fit for you.
And then 50 years ago, we were using redwood in California, right? So, hey, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We're going to stay on. We're going to stop the recording, and then we'll stay on and answer a couple of more questions if anybody has anything. Before saying goodbye, I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and many thanks. Hey, Craig, thank you for this. Hey, next Wednesday, we're going to be doing Anarchist Wine Company. One of our brands is going to be doing Inquisitive Sips. And we're going to be doing a cooking demo with our friends at Mutiny Wine Room down in Houston. Chef Eduardo is going to be kind of walking us through food preparation, and we're really excited to kind of show a kitchen demonstration. Knives, alcohol, and fire, 3 of the best things being done at the exact same time. And then in 2 weeks, Wine Foundry Wednesday will be returning just like we are right now. I'm going to say hi old silver away. I think it's time for some Rhone Rangers. We'll chat about things, all things Rhone, with Viognier, Syrah, Grenache, Mourvèdre. We've got a guest lined up for that one. And then finally, of course, our book club. We got the little nod in Forbes last week, or just over a week ago. Nick Jackson is an MW, a Master of Wine, and it's less of a book and more of kind of a how-to manifesto of how to taste. Kind of fascinating, because he said that he has been tasting wrong the whole time. He didn't know how to taste for acid and tannins, and as winemakers, it's like, really? That's kind of tasting 101. So kind of a fascinating approach. So we'll stop the recording and we'll stick around if anybody has any questions. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.